Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm always joined by this woman here.
I'm still waiting on the complete production.
Yeah, that's all I could get for you. This woman here, Attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Well, everybody already knows who you are anyway. The beloved, the admired, the adored, mostly in our own head,
I was
Sonia
gonna
Madison.
say sometimes you have to be reminded. So I have to train you to say it.
Sometimes I almost vomited.
Well,
So
did you?
how was the
I was gonna
huh?
say great minds. I was gonna say, did you enjoy it, the Super Bowl?
I did enjoy the Super Bowl. It was actually a good game. I enjoyed the game again. Of course, I didn't have a dog in the fight, and so I experimented around. Therese made me make chili for the first time, really. I don't recall ever making chili before, but she's like, "I want you to make the chili." I said, "What? Really? Okay." I'm a chef extraordinaire anyway, so it was a piece of cake. Let's throw this in there, throw that in there, and then voila, it's delicious. Yeah, how about yourself?
Yeah, it was good. I will say the commercials are something I typically watch, and I don't know if you saw the Jesus Gets Us commercial that's been making controversial headlines. Do you remember
No, I
that?
didn't see that. I didn't see that
You
one.
making chili? Was that what
I
was
was
going
probably making chili around about at that time. I was eating, and I'm sure belching and
on?
probably shouldn't. I probably shouldn't mention that I was eating chili based off of our topic for today, anyway. But and now after last week, I'm realizing that chili is not helping my prostate health either. So,
Hey, we trying
but
to
no.
do
What about
some
the?
reckoning here.
Well, what about the commercial? Jesus gets you.
Jesus Gets Us. I think that's what it was. But in various stills in the commercial is showing someone washing someone else's feet. So, I mean, you
Hmm.
see at one point a woman washing another woman's feet. You may see someone working on a train that is getting her feet washed by someone that may be more professional. You may see someone who appears to be like a homosexual or getting their feet washed by a guy that a male, another male. I mean, it was various steals. And again, I've only remember seeing it once or twice, but at the end they say, Jesus did not teach hate. Jesus washed feet. And so it's kind of like a Jesus Gets Us. But one of the controversies was that it was sponsored, and this is allegedly, I don't know anything about it, but it was sponsored by Hobby Lobby. And people were saying, do not donate to this organization because it's going to be used to continue to promote um, anti-abortion as well as anti-LGBTQ policies.
But they had a gay person, Jesus watching, or somebody watching the feet of a gay person,
Well, again,
right?
wouldn't like to say it, I'm gay walking across the screen. I mean, you can make the analogy based on what the person was wearing. Um, but a lot of people will argue that you can love someone while still not being supportive of certain policies. Again, it's controversy. So
Wow.
I don't know if you saw the Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I did see that. I did see that. For a minute, I didn't realize that it was a commercial. I didn't realize that it was a political ad at that point. I was like, why are they showing this? And he caught a lot of flack from his family members. Like, we don't support you. Don't put our family members in this.
He did.
Oh,
And he did an apology explaining that he'd had nothing to do with it. These PACs can't talk to us or get our approval and all this kind of stuff.
no, wow, that's ridiculous.
No sort of
But
politics in the Super Bowl.
no, that's where it belongs, right? Of
Right.
course, as long as it's conservative, as long as it's conservative politics, you can't have anything like kneeling during an anthem or anything.
Right. I
God
don't even
forbid
that
that.
didn't even like they didn't like to lift every voice and sing. That was such a big thing on Twitter. Why are we singing the Black national anthem? It should just be one national anthem. Like, are we seriously upset over this song?
Well, there's already a black Independence Day, so Juneteenth, so
Hey,
they're mad about that too.
we supposed to shut up and just take the crumbs we can get, right?
I'm gonna leave that one out there hanging for you. You can catch all of the flack for that one there, but
I'm just saying that if that's the message, kind of like what they told LeBron, just shut up and dribble, right? And what Laura Ingham said, shut up and dribble.
Ooh,
I know,
Jesus,
it's a
that's
shame.
horrible.
It's a shame.
Hey, so your girl is supposed to be testifying before the court tomorrow, though, right? Not
Which
tomorrow,
girl? You
Thursday.
talking about
But this past Thursday. Is it? Yeah, Vonnie Willis.
Yeah, well, there's a hearing scheduled, so we'll see. Because I feel like it constantly gets pushed back here and there, but we'll see. And again, the issue, of course, that's being raised is whether or not it's relevant. Because she's
Yeah.
trying to push back on not only getting excused, but having to divulge any evidence related to this sort. And while I agree with her position, it's not relevant at the same time. Like we saw what's going on in New York, so many allowances got made because of Trump that other people would not have received that I
Hmm.
can see a judge being even more cautious with this as well.
Yeah. And I guess the key question is whether or not, and this is beyond me, whether or not funds were used that were used to pay him were used to enrich her afterwards. I'm like, if this is this man's paycheck, like he can't spend his money however he wants to spend it on. That's
Well,
ridiculous to me.
and to me, that's more of a question that offends the taxpayers. Like that's a separate lawsuit, right? If you're misusing funds, and that's something that as taxpayers we need to talk to you about. But that has nothing to do with did you abuse this office to bring charges that were legitimately held as evidence by a grand jury. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. And so, excuse me, that's why I say I think she's of course, arguing that none of this stuff needs to be, presented. None of this stuff needs to be examined. And the idea that I need to recuse myself or dismiss this is without merit. And to me, how the money was spent is not necessarily relevant, again, unless you are showing that it was used to buy evidence or used to fabricate a story.
I might go on the record right now and say that I wouldn't be surprised if the whole charge against him got dropped as a result of this. But not because of her wrongdoing, but because you can't get another DA in Georgia to prosecute it. And you can't get another because it was already difficult enough for her to really even find prosecutors who are willing to take up the case. Just because, if not for political reasons, also because of the number of threats that they're getting to their persons and to their family members as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if the entire case in this situation is dropped against him and that he gets out of the other Mar-a-Lago and the Jack Smith case. And if he does, all hell is going to break loose because people are going to be saying, all hail Donald Trump, the Messiah, because and listen, I wrote an article some years ago called Could Trump Be Antichrist? And I'm not saying that I believe that he is, but I mean, some of his doctrine is antichrist. If you believe that you can redeem yourself, that's antichrist. And that's what he said. He just never had to ask for forgiveness. And that if he did wrong, he just basically tries to make it right himself. And so I'm concerned because one of the things that the scripture talks about is, a person rising to power after having survived death or been resurrected from the dead. And whether that's a literal physical death or whether it's resurrecting after a political death or after a social death or figurative or metaphorical death, being able to still rise from the ashes and assume power. That would be, to me, an ominous occurrence if he actually did get acquitted of all of these things, or if he was found guilty, not guilty of all of them, even if he went through trials, he still will come out on top and will do nothing but invigorate his base to continue to worship him even more. And so I'd be very concerned about that happening. I think it's a very real possibility.
It's a possibility, but I would be surprised. I would be surprised. The evidence is so overwhelming. Because to me, they had to have such overwhelming evidence even to bring this, but it's so overwhelming. We've already seen that Rudy Giuliani has already been held liable for his part. We see that even when it came to the sexual assault with Jean Carroll. I mean, he's been convicted. We see that in New York. He's been convicted of fraud. The convictions aren't the issue. It's one, you're not going to get your money, which we understand. That's why he is running for president. But two, the base doesn't care. So to me, there is no point in, not going ahead and going through this process and allowing the conviction to happen, because it's still not going to change the sentiments of his base. But I'm more so anxious to see what the Supreme Court is going to do as it not only relates to Colorado, but also, they've given his attorney 1 week, 1 week to prove to us why he should receive some type of absolute immunity, whatever that means. And so, I mean, again, I'm seeing the judicial system play out not in his favor, but to your point, I just don't see people caring about it.
But they care about Joe Biden and his mental state.
And again, they more so care about the fact that Kamala Harris could be the next president. That is the fear that they're stoking.
That might be true. That might be true. But the whole issue of them really talking about, and I heard a commentary, a commenter actually make mention of this. Oh, it was actually Nancy Pelosi. She was in an interview, and she was talking about how how her special counsel, actually made the comment about him forgetting certain key things in the interview. And she said, but nobody make any mention over 180 times Donald Trump during his depositions made reference to say, I don't recall. I don't recall. Of course, that's what people say sometimes, but nobody makes a big deal about him not recalling those things. I guess you assume that he really did recall, but he was just saying, I don't recall, in order to protect himself and not incriminate himself. Either one of the two things happened. Either he was trying to not incriminate himself, or he just literally didn't recall. So which one is worse?
Well, first of all, if you say Nikki Haley, automatically I gotta remind you of your favorite candidate and her extreme flaws, because recently he was talking about something about her husband. Like, where is your husband? And I think he's in the military or something of the sort.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Oh, how dare he? Go talk about someone who's in the military serving their country." And one of the reporters asked her, "Well, hold on. Back when he did this to John McCain, you signed on to his administration. Why now are you attacking him?"
Because it's her husband and it's politically expedient.
And her response, "Well, I mean, I served the campaign, but again, blah blah blah." And I'm like, no, you can't have it both ways, Miss Haley. But to your question, is it? To me, again, Donald, the fact that he has said, I will be a dictator, the fact that he has said, I will go after anyone that has gone after me, even the fact that he said, all those that supported Nikki Haley, don't even bother sending your money over this way. That is way more concerning for me than if you're forgetful about a certain event, or even back to the Joe Biden, if you're forgetful about your son's birthday, because I want to make sure you have the team around you that still is giving you sound advice. And I would not trust that with Donald Trump, particularly given his policy and his intent on being a dictator.
Yeah. Now he actually had this past week was saying something to the extent where he encouraged Russia to actually go out and do whatever Russia wants to do, whatever Vladimir Putin wants to do to any member of NATO who doesn't pay their fair share. And again, Republicans are looking at that and saying, well, this is just rhetoric. You can't pay attention to what he says. Watch what he does. And I saw something where Ambassador John Bolton said, well, you weren't sitting next to me in the room with him when he was already ready to walk away from NATO. And what he's saying, right, of all the times, this is not the time to think that it's just rhetoric from him. This is a legitimate plan that he wants to do. He's finished with NATO. And when he can when and if he has an opportunity to get out of NATO, he will do that. And the mere fact that he would lay bare and expose potential other countries because they're not holding up their fair share. And some people will say, well, yeah, if you're not paying for the protection, you shouldn't get the protection at this point. But I think what happens is that people, and John Bolton made this very important, I think, astute observation. He said, the case has not been made to the American people that the United States is not supporting Europe and other NATO countries out of some great charitable act. They're doing that. They're supporting it because it's in our national interest to support NATO. And so as a result, when you start saying, well, if you're not going to do this, then we're not going to offer any type of protection, and we're backing out, we're taking our ball and we're going home, taking our marbles and going home. And so it's to our strategic national interests and national security interests to ensure that these other countries remain safe and are protected by the NATO alliance.
Chance people don't study history enough, because again, if you studied that World War II, you know what happens when you got a dictator like Hitler that pretty much genocide of millions and millions and millions of people, and it spreads from country to country to country to country. I mean, that was part of what NATO and other treaties come about, because they're resolving an issue that became a huge foreign concern. And so, I
Wait a
mean, if we're
minute.
not studying history, we're losing it.
Are you saying that World War II has already happened? Donald Trump said that Joe Biden was going to start World War II.
Hence why we need to study history, right?
Anyway, we're talking about Black history this month, and we're talking about Black health that matters. And so we're not just talking about national security issue. We're talking also about Black security. And one of the ways that we maintain our health security is to maintain health. In fact, poor health is one of the main reasons why in hospital bills, medical expenses in the United States is one of the leading reasons why people file bankruptcy. It's because the cost of medicine is so exorbitant. We're not necessarily talking about the cost of it today, but today what we want to talk about is some of the diseases that inflict the Black population disproportionately. I mean, there's a whole host of diseases that do afflict the Black community more aggressively than it does other non-Black communities, and particularly white communities. But I'm delighted today to have on the show with us Dr. Cesar Cardona. He is a graduate of the New Jersey Medical School and did his residency at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and completed a fellowship in nephrology at Vanderbilt University. For a period of time, he was also on faculty at Meharry Medical College and served as the director of the Division of Nephrology. Currently, he is in private practice and working at the, I believe it is nephrology. He's a partner at Nephrology Associates in Tennessee. It's one of the finest nephrologists in the city, in the state, in the country. He's married to one woman, has 2 children, a Titans fan, and I don't know if he golfs or not, but I'm sure that if he had more time, he would really like to golf. But probably yes, this is what doctors do. And so I really want to bring on to the show Dr. Cardona, if we can get him to come and join us.
All right. How you doing?
Sir, welcome to the Roundtable Console. Thank you for joining us here on the Roundtable Console.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay out the politics. I'm gonna talk about health.
You said
I haven't
anything.
read on the news. I'm not that informed to really make any kind of very good statements that are backed up by facts.
Yeah. We will not put you in jeopardy of that. Only
All right, I
Sonya really
appreciate
likes
that.
Sonya likes to jump out on that ledge often by herself. I be trying to pull her back sometimes, like, Sonya, don't go so far. Come back here. But she doesn't hold her tongue, Eddie. So I appreciate that, Anna. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what is nephrology and how did you get interested in nephrology and why?
Okay. Well, when I was in medical school, I noticed that most of the difficult cases were nephrology, and people tended to say, well, let's call the kidney doctor to deal with that, or let's call the kidney doctor to deal with that. That's too complicated. Let's call the kidney doctor to deal with that. And I was like, well, why are we running away from that stuff? So I was like, well, if they're getting all the hard stuff, let me do that. I know it sounds crazy, like counterintuitive, people sometimes pick the easy way out. I was like,
I bet say,
you
oh,
know.
he took Mark because he said, let me get away and do ENT.
Oh, he did.
Hey,
He was
listen.
like,
Hey,
I'm
listen.
gonna deal with these surgeries and
Listen,
you
head
know.
neck anatomy is some of the most complicated anatomy in the
That is true.
body. So
That is true.
there we
That
go.
is true.
And it's one of the most competitive fields too. Thank you. But
It
carry
is.
on.
Nephrology, I think about like 30% go unfilled because people do not want to go through the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, my uncle was also on dialysis. He was a very bad patient. He ate a lot of avocados, which have a lot of potassium, which, you know, if you take too much potassium and your potassium gets too high, it could stop your heart, you know. But the kidneys get rid of potassium. That's why it's such an issue. Like, typically, when you talk about a cardiac diet, they say you want a good deal of potassium and low sodium in there because potassium at appropriate dosages is actually pretty good for blood pressure. But if it's too high, it's too bad. You know, it's a bad thing. But, you know, I got
Blood
into it
pressure is
because
guacamole.
guacamole, yeah.
Oh
So,
my.
I can't imagine our issues are eating too much avocado, but you
well,
tell
you know, he was in Puerto Rico, so he had an avocado tree in his backyard. So
Mm.
he literally just had to open up the screen, look at the ground, pick something up, wash it off, and eat it.
Now you're of Puerto Rican descent as well.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
No,
great.
his uncle is separate. But I asked that to say,
Could have been by marriage.
but I asked that to say, what typically is the food for, you know, Black Americans in particular that kind of messes up their kidneys? Because I mean, I joke that I don't think we're eating a lot of avocados, but at the same time, we're probably eating something else that has too much of something that is
Well,
hurting.
it's salt. You know,
Salt.
Mark mentioned about the chili. You know,
The judgment,
salt,
I feel it.
you
You were just
know,
shaking your head when he said it.
like you know, ultimately, when you look at just historically, I mean, you know, food in just in general in the South and just among African Americans, Black culture, Caribbean culture, loaded with salt. You know, loaded with carbs. And, you know, part of the issue that we deal with is when you see a doctor, you know, the doctor says, hey, you know, we need to diet and exercise. I'm like, okay, I need to diet, I need to exercise. What does that mean? You know, like if you asked 10 people, what does diet and exercise mean to you? You're going to get 10 different answers. You know, some people are going to say, well, you know, walking. Some people are going to say running. Some people are going to say, I got to go to the gym 2 hours a day for a week. You know, that's exercise, you know, but not everybody needs to do that, you know. So if you walk 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, not related to work, that's like moderate exercise that you could do to help with losing weight, staying healthy, improving your cardiovascular health. Diet, you know, low carb, low sodium diet, but the average Tennessean has about 8 grams of sodium in their diet. And yeah, the American Heart Association, they
Daily?
recommend, yeah, daily.
Are you kidding me? Well, I don't feel
Yeah.
so bad then. I don't
Yeah.
get 8 grams.
In that chili, you're
No,
like,
but that's the average Tennessean. That's the average Tennessean. So, and then I should have brushed up my statistics, but typically when you go to the hospital, you recommend a low sodium diet. They're doing 2 grams, but then there's a little bit of discrepancy in terms of whether 2 grams is okay or if you should do 4 grams. Most people will agree 2 grams. I think 2 grams of sodium or less is probably better in terms of restricting sodium for safety reasons and for overall health and blood pressure reasons. But, you know, I'm not.
And so for a period of time,
sorry?
they actually went down to like 1,500 for Blacks, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
it's
the more
crazy.
sodium you have in your diet, the higher the issue is in terms of blood pressure, you know?
So for people again that are still trying to understand, what does the kidney do and why is it important? And you know, what happens if it fails? Go ahead and educate us.
Go through that. Okay. So
By people, she means her.
like her, okay. So you know,
It's
ultimately the kidneys are kind of like the garbage truck of the body. You know, they get rid of the waste, right? So what I usually tell people is when you're seeing a kidney doctor and we're looking at your labs, we're looking at something called the creatinine. And something called the estimated GFR, okay? And then you use the creatinine to calculate the estimated GFR, all right? So if you think about the kidneys like the garbage truck, and if the garbage truck is not doing its job, there's a whole bunch of trash everywhere. You look around, you see trash. So you measure it, there's like a lot of trash. So that creatinine value that measures is going to be high because the kidneys are not doing its job to get rid of that trash. And then by having a high kidney function, when you calculate that EGFR, it's going to be low because it's basically showing how well the kidneys are working. So if that value goes too low and the kidneys aren't doing their job, then you start to hold on to more fluid, your potassium goes up, you can't control the acid base in your body. So your body has to have a certain level of acid and base to kind of maintain stability. So if your kidneys fail, you get too much acid in your body, and then you get toxins that build up in your body. And then when those toxins are really high, when your kidney function is really low, then you need dialysis. And
Dialysis being, I know
so,
we hear dialysis a lot, but what
I was gonna
exactly is
say.
dialysis?
so dialysis is
Trademark now.
basically a way of purifying the sorry, we got some. All right. Hold on one second. All right. Sorry, my son was having a moment. He's 3, so I'm just like, okay. But dialysis, there's 2 ways to do dialysis. One is where we basically clean out your blood. So we either through a fistula, which is surgically created in your arm, and it basically is where you take your arteries and your veins and you put them together, and it kind of gets creates a really big vein. Because if you ever like seen someone draw blood, you know that, oh, well, this vein is gone or that vein is gone. So imagine getting a whole bunch of blood to come out of your body, go into a machine, and go back in. So you need to create a vessel where that can work really well. So that's where you create a fistula, where your artery and your vein are put together, and it kind of makes it a little bit big so that it can deal with that trauma. So then when your blood goes into the machine, it gets cleaned out and put right back in. And then there's something else called peritoneal dialysis, which is where the lining of your peritoneum is used as a way to kind of remove toxins. And you do that at home. And the majority of the country of the world does mostly peritoneal dialysis. The U.S. doesn't do as much.
Interesting. Why is that? Why is it that we don't do much of the peritoneal dialysis?
So I think that some of it is economic, some of it is comfort. So in the 80s, when they started to pay for dialysis, they started to have these large dialysis organizations. And if you're a kidney doctor, you could just have like 20, 30, 40 patients in one area and then see all of them, like just going in and walking around the room, seeing all of them, and then walking out. So if you think about using your time, that's very time manageable. The second thing is that, I think that, some people just kind of got used to that concept, but, ultimately, I think PD is very good. And PD is the acronym for peritoneal dialysis. And, um, you know, if you think about what is needed for hemodialysis, you need a company to oversee it. You need labs to be checked. You need a lot of water. You need electricity. You need all these different things. You need a staff with a nurse and tech and a nurse manager, and then the periodic meetings to ensure quality, and then someone to oversee it, and then regional people to oversee all that kind of stuff. You need a lot of organization and revenue to do something like that. A lot of other countries, they may not necessarily have that ability to kind of put that kind of revenue into something like that. But the thing is this, peritoneal dialysis has a very good quality of life for patients that want to do it, because you do it throughout the day. You're at home. You could do it. If you're a teacher, you could take a break, and in between your classes, do an exchange where you put the fluid in your belly, let it sit, and empty the stuff before you put it in. So it's very kind of user friendly.
Well, I don't want to encourage people to be okay if that's the trajectory that they want to go to. But I imagine people come to you when it's too late or when they've missed certain symptoms. So what would you say, assuming they're not dieting as you would like, what would you say, at what point are you saying, okay, well, if this is happening to you, or you're experiencing certain symptoms, or you're a certain age, you need to get it checked?
Yeah. So what I typically say is I think screening by a regular doctor. So one thing that I want to talk about, which may be completely different, and the focus is sometimes it's the basics that you got to focus on. So a lot of people in our community don't have primary care. So if you think about it this way, especially Black men, so a lot of times in my clinic, if I had to look at the patient population in terms of African Americans and people of color, a lot of times it's women more so than men that are being seen. Men, they eventually get seen, but it's sometimes later. And a lot of that is just that they don't feel the need to go to a doctor. Culturally, they're always working. Puerto Ricans do the same thing. Part of the issues why my uncle was such a bad patient is because he had 2, 3 jobs. He was working night shift, and then every other day he was working the other shift. So he basically just worked himself into bad health. And by the time he tried or thought about taking care of it, it was too late. And I think that a lot of that is also an economic issue. Like if you think about it, if you don't have insurance, or if you don't have money to see a doctor, or if you don't have the time or the ability to take off, you're not going to see one. So how does someone get to see a kidney doctor? Typically they see their primary care doctor, they draw labs, they see that their kidney function is bad, and then they come and see me. So you have to have a gatekeeper to go into the facility. And typically the gatekeepers for specialists like cardiologists or kidney doctors or lung doctors or any other kind of specialty is a primary care doctor. So if a primary care doctor is not even available, how are they going to see me? Just kind of focusing on some of the issues that you had. So basics are they see a primary care doctor, they draw labs, they look at their urine. If someone has protein in the urine, that could be an indicator of poor kidney health. If their kidney numbers are not doing well, that's an obvious indicator of poor kidney health. And then different primary care doctors have different thresholds for sending someone to a kidney doctor. But ultimately, one of the universal thresholds is if their kidney function number, the EGFR, is less than 60, a lot of times I'll get a consult then. Some doctors will wait until later if, if there's no protein in the urine. But realistically, I tell pretty much all primary care doctors, if it's less than 60, just have them see me, because it might be something else other than diabetes or high blood pressure. And I think that it's better to have someone see someone early rather than too late.
So
There's
you touched on it a little bit.
feel, I guess. It's not something you can feel. I mean, it because you also missing urine. I imagine if you're consistently having dark urine, maybe that
Yeah.
because I agree, it is a problem that we're not seeing our primary care physician. But at the same time, if we do, or when we do, I want to make sure we're articulating appropriate symptoms, or articulating what it is, so that they can do the appropriate test, or they can look into that
Oh
stuff.
no, I understand that. So the issue is that a lot of times people really only have symptoms from a kidney standpoint when it's too late, when they need dialysis or things like that. Like you might have some mild symptoms like swelling in the legs, or some lab abnormalities might be kind of just slightly off in the early stages, and then more moderate. But realistically, you only really have symptoms of kidney toxicity where your body can't get rid of the kidney toxins when it's too late. And by then they should have already seen or been referred to a kidney doctor, you know? That's why I said, like, the biggest issue with kidney health is not so much the symptoms. The symptoms come really late. But the issue is if people are getting their labs checked. If they don't have a primary care doctor, they're not going to get their lab checked. If they're getting urine checked, not all medical conditions merit a urine, but pretty much if you have diabetes or high blood pressure, you have a urine at least once a year, depending on how things are. And for other conditions, probably like every 3 to 6 months or something like that.
So, can the kidney heal itself once it's injured?
So there is something called acute kidney injury, and there's something called chronic kidney disease. All right. So the majority of nephrology practice is chronic kidney disease and hypertension management. In the hospital, oftentimes, and sometimes in the outpatient setting, you have something called acute kidney injury. So um, I give the example of my roommate from college. All right. And bear with me because I'm going to go on a tangent and down a rabbit hole. All right. Um, so my roommate from college, he's about 5'4". All right. And we were friends with a couple of guys on the football basketball team. So he decided to go to the gym and he saw them there. He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go lift with you guys." So he's 5'4". One of the guys was about 6'6". Another one was like 6'3". The other one 6'4". These like 200 something pound guys. And my roommate from college probably like 5'4", $130, you know. So this was just a recipe for disaster. So he's over there, he's lifting and trying to keep up, and then his arms are basically falling off. He walks out, he comes in, he's like, "Yo, I just lifted with 2 of the football players and 1 of the basketball players." I'm like, "Okay, good. How do you feel?" He's like, "I think I might die." You know, the next day he started peeing like really dark urine. Okay.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like just black Coca-Cola looking urine. And he had something called rhabdo. All right. So rhabdomyolysis is, typically when like your muscles kind of break down and then you just kind of pee really dark and it could lead to renal failure. He went to the college health, and luckily his kidney function was okay, but they told him to just drink tons of water and hydrate. And usually if your kidneys are healthy, that can happen. Now, if you have pre-existing kidney disease and he would have done that, his kidneys would have definitely gotten really bad. And I've seen many people um, do basically exert themselves so much that they can go into rhabdo and develop kidney failure. And sometimes you don't even have rhabdo; you just get really dehydrated, and your kidneys get bad. And then you go to the hospital because you feel bad. Your kidney function is really bad, and then they give you fluid. You feel better. Oftentimes, you go back to normal or go back to close to normal. Not all the time, but I guess that's one example of what we call acute kidney injury, where your kidneys kind of heal itself. But yeah, that can happen.
Yeah, so there's rhabdomyolysis as it's one of the things that we hear a lot with marathon runners as well, or people who
Yeah,
are inadequately trained for marathons, and so that really dark urine is just because of the breakdown of the muscle proteins, and
yeah,
again the kidneys, as you said, being the garbage trunk, just trying to clear all of that out of there.
yeah. And then when it's really bad, they just quit. They said, "No, these guys will have to pick up their own trash. I'm done. I'm out. It's 5 o'clock. Peace."
As long as they don't bring a gun. Uh, so, question for you. So, you mentioned it before about hypertension and diabetes, and how does that all factor into kidney health and kidney disease?
Okay. So the number one cause of kidney disease leading to people going on dialysis is diabetes. The number two cause is hypertension. The third common indicator are people that have both. And then four is other, and other could be a host of other different things, But um, ultimately, when you think about it that way, if you have well controlled diabetes and well controlled hypertension, then the likelihood of you going on dialysis is very low. The likelihood of you developing kidney disease is just kind of a lot of times really based on genetics, based on risk factors, based on your ability to control. But sometimes, even with the best of scenarios and with the best of controls, you could still develop moderate to severe degrees of kidney disease, sometimes mild degrees of kidney disease with those medical conditions. So it's real important to kind of take care of it and have someone watch those levels. And I would have primary care doctors have a very low threshold to refer because they're dealing with so many other things. Like, okay, what's your cholesterol level? What's your kidney number? What's your blood pressure? What's your liver function doing? Am I telling them to quit smoking? Am I telling them to, get their colonoscopy and all the other things. So they have like 5 or 6 different things that they're speaking to every single patient about. So then they look at the creatinine, it's like, oh, it's a little off. Okay, drink some more water, So like they have so many other things on their plate that they have to take care of, and typically the waiting room is full. They only have a few minutes to speak to each patient. They overbook people because people call and say, hey, I really need to get in to see you. And then they say yes. And then, and then people get mad at their waiting. It's like, well, I'm overbooked. I have to speak with this person about end of life decisions. This other person wants their medication refilled before they go on their trip. I got to do all this other stuff, So they're wearing so many different hats. It's like, look, let's take this hat off. Here, kidney doctor, you take care of that,
So do you manage diabetes then, or what's the
I
role?
don't directly manage diabetes. Typically, what I try to do is encourage the primary care doctors to make medication adjustments that will help with diabetes management, or there are specific medications that we give that help delay the progression of chronic kidney disease for management of in the setting of diabetes, especially with protein in the urine. And we try to make titrations on the medication appropriately so that we can have the best control. And sometimes that can take months, because you try different things. You're like, okay, this one worked. Well, it did work, but then there was a side effect. Let me pull back on that. So some of the stuff is really trial and error.
So to make sure I understand, with the kidneys, I mean, it's not as much hereditary, but if you have a condition that's hereditary, it could put you in an escalated risk of having kidney failure. I mean, I know we talked about the food as well, but
Yeah.
I just want to make sure people understand, like, if you're predisposed to one, it can affect the other.
So if you have a family history of diabetic kidney disease, you're 40% likely to develop diabetic kidney disease if you have diabetes or if you are diagnosed with diabetes. So that's kind of one specific statistic in terms of risk factors from a familial standpoint that is important. The second thing is hypertension is typically family, there's strong family history for that. And then diabetes is typically a family history for that. So then if you do the math, okay, diabetes and hypertension have strong family history. And then if you have a family history of diabetic kidney disease, you're more likely to develop that, kidney disease due to diabetes. So there's a lot of that. And then the issue with management is a lot of times diet and exercise, but it's also medication, So you got to get on the right medications and you need to take them.
Now so last week we talked to a urologist. You probably know him, Dr. Billups, as well.
Okay.
Yes. And so he was telling us that particularly among the Black population, that PSAs were probably like 2.4 times less likely to get a PSA checked. And I'm wondering, as Black people, and a lot of that is probably not our own doing, because even if we're going to see the doctors, they very well may not necessarily order a PSA. And again, that's one of those health disparities. Where do you see the disparities in terms of access to care, particularly in populations of color? Particularly in those areas where patients should be advocating for themselves to get certain tests. For example, you mentioned if you have hypertension, you should at least once a year have your urine protein checked. I could see very easily how a primary care doctor is not saying, oh, they're checking your labs, but that's not part of their routine workup every year. They're just checking your renal function, your kidney function test, checking your blood count and your thyroid hormone levels. And then like, all of this looks pretty good right there. I'm going to leave it alone. But you were saying that's maybe we should be also saying, hey, maybe you should check my urine protein at this point. Because can you have elevated urine protein with the normal creatinine?
Yes.
And remind our viewers what PSA is. Mark likes to
It's,
see.
that's a prostate specific antigen. And so we were talking about prostate screening. And so we were saying that, we don't often get that PSA.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we encourage people to do is to, hey, be proactive about your healthcare. Ask your doctor to check a PSA if they're not doing a DRE, if they're not doing a digital rectal examination. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's correct. So one disparity that has recently been corrected is the EGFR equation. Okay. So I'll kind of get into that a little bit. So there were several different studies for the EGFR equation. One was MDRD, which is of trial modified dietary reduction as relates to kidney disease. I might be getting that wrong. And there was a CKD epi, which is a chronic kidney disease epidemiological study. So they calculate their own EGFR equation. But the thing is that those equations broke down the EGFR based on race, because statistically speaking, when they looked at the EGFRs, they did notice a difference based on those formulas based on race. So what would oftentimes happen is that if someone's at an early level of chronic kidney disease, you have EGFR non-African American, EGFR African American. And if your EGFR was above 60, some labs don't even, if your creatinine was calculated, to have an EGFR above 60, some didn't even put out the number. So, if you're looking, it's like, okay, EGFR is greater than 60, so there's no number. Someone could be 80, 90, or someone could be 62. But if there's no number that's being spit out, how do you know what it is? And the other thing is that, so then a lot of times you just get confused, because like, wait a minute, non-African American, African American, and you kind of just look at it. It's like, wait a minute, which one is this? So recently we've basically switched over to a non-race based EGFR, which basically was done through calculations to be race neutral. Okay. And I think that has helped in terms of more referrals for African Americans and eliminating a disparity to some degree.
And that's because African Americans generally had a higher
They
EGFR?
generally had a higher EGFR when you looked at the MDRD equation or a CKD epi. So, and the difference was probably like anywhere between 6 to 8 points. But if you think about it, if you're a primary care doctor and you're referring someone when they're less than 60 versus if they are, above that, if you're looking at the EGFR equation, you have two numbers, you might not always look at the right one. So it's like.
So and I guess I still want to get some more clarity about this urine protein, because you can still have protein in your urine, which is an indication of potential kidney injury, and still have a normal creatinine. So if your primary care doctor is only drawing blood work from you on an annual basis and you have hypertension, it's possible that you might have proteinuria and some ongoing kidney disease that neither you or your primary care doctor knows about, correct?
That's correct. And it's not just the presence of protein, but it's also the quantity. Because you could check protein in the urine in many different ways. There's the urinalysis, which is essentially, a dipstick, and it just kind of spits out, okay, trace, which is like plus based on the color, or like 1+ or 2+ or 3+. But when you start looking at them, it's like, is this teal or is this yellow? I don't really know. Like, my wife says I'm colorblind. So like I could definitely see looking at the thing and like looking at this and like, wait a minute, is this 2+ or 1+? I don't know, So if you're not checking the urine, that's one thing. But then even if you check it, if you're just doing a urinalysis and it's trace or like just a little bit, then it's really hard to tell. Like some of the newer urinalysis where you actually send it to the lab, they have a slightly better calculation. But even then, it doesn't give the exact amount of protein that you have in the urine. And one of the common consults that I have is people, especially younger people, that have normal kidney function, and they're peeing tons of protein. And the doctor's like, whoa, this person needs to go see a kidney doctor,
When I often hear of protein in the urine, I'm often hearing about pregnant women, preeclampsia. I mean, is that related to the kidney, or is that something separately happening?
No, it's definitely related to the kidneys. There have been studies that show that women that have preeclampsia um, can develop protein in the urine during preeclampsia, but then there are different blood tests that have been checked. One is FLT1, I think it's FLT1 or something like that, where that remains elevated kind of throughout their lifetime. And it has been noted to be a contributor of chronic kidney disease and development of hypertension in the future. So ultimately, preeclampsia, that condition in and of itself, does have an increased risk of developing hypertension later in the future or chronic kidney disease later in the future. I had one patient that she gave birth like 20 years ago, and she had preeclampsia and it never got better. She developed kidney disease and it just kind of slowly over time got worse. So I'm not going to necessarily get too much into politics, but in terms of women's health, if a woman is pregnant and it's before the 24-week period where it was prior to Dobbs' decision, if she had significant preeclampsia or kidney issues or something like that, because women can have chronic kidney disease, excuse me, prior to being pregnant. Having chronic kidney disease does not prevent you from becoming pregnant. Being on dialysis does not prevent you from becoming pregnant. It just makes it harder to sustain the pregnancy, and it makes it more likely to develop a lot of different complications from the pregnancy. So that you can have a lot of issues that can potentially happen as a result of having chronic kidney disease, as a result of having preeclampsia. And, there's usually a 20-week cutoff. So if you had pre-existing protein in the urine and hypertension prior to 20 weeks gestation, then that was pre-existing. If it's 20 weeks, if it develops after 20 weeks, then it's essentially considered preeclampsia or pregnancy-induced hypertension, which is the medical term for it. So women have lost their children, developed strokes, heart attacks, and had a lot of major issues as it relates to preeclampsia.
Yeah, well, and I
So
often hear a lot of women that really want to push through, their
yeah,
pregnancies or are wanting to have it natural. And particularly when it comes to us as Black women, we already, to some degree, have doctors who think that we're just built to sustain whatever pain. So we articulate a pain, it becomes, oh, you're just being a complainer. You're not, truly in pain, or you're not truly having an issue. But again, I just want to make sure then you're articulating, hey, listen, not only is there a certain point that perhaps you may want to rethink a vaginal birth or a natural birth, but also make sure you're feeling or listening to something that could, like you said, trigger a pre-existing condition or trigger, a problem or complication in your pregnancy.
yeah. And the thing is this, like, there are maternal fetal medicine specialists. They manage preeclampsia all the time. They manage high risk pregnancies, and they do a very good job of doing that. The issue is that one thing is that a lot of them are trained in abortion. So then, if you essentially have a complication, they would make the decision to medically do the right thing if needed. I'm not speaking in terms of whether I'm for it or not. I'm just speaking strictly medical. I'm not trying to get into the politics, but ultimately, these are decisions that they make. And then now that a lot of MFM doctors and obstetricians are leaving areas where there's no abortion, and then you're looking at rural areas specifically, a lot of rural areas, they only have like one or two OBGYN doctors, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, and then family medicine doctors also provide prenatal and postnatal care and everything like that. So, you're looking at a paucity of conditions where if it is not necessarily managed correctly, they can run into a lot of different problems. So it's really important to have access to care is my point, because um, I've taken care of patients, not so much now, but especially when I was in training where I took care of more patients, or when I was faculty at Meharry, we took care of a lot of pregnant patients with CKD, and management of their complications is very hard, and I remembered when I was in training, we had one patient, her blood pressure was just so tough to manage that she lost a baby, and she was hospitalized, and she had the GYN doctor seeing her, the heart doctor seeing her, we were seeing her, and there wasn't anything we could do,
Yeah.
and it's sad. It really is.
Yeah. In these final minutes, if I could get you to just give our viewers and listeners a quick suggestions about ways that they can advocate for their own health as it relates to hypertension.
Okay.
What are the numbers that they should be looking at? Diabetes, are there numbers that they should be looking at for that? A1C, and then also, how do we adjust our diet? What things should be included in our diets and or excluded from our diets to try to help us to participate in our own healthcare?
Okay. Thanks for pulling me back to the basics. I appreciate
Well,
it.
this is
Trying to
where we
save
close
you.
out, huh?
You know,
Get you out of
I
political
went down
land.
the rabbit hole too much, But yeah, so albumin to creatinine ratio. Okay. So you check a urine for an albumin to creatinine ratio. If you just check a urine albumin, it's not going to be as accurate. You need to have both values to create the ratio. It should be less than 30. All right. If it's slightly above 30, that is by definition what we call microalbuminuria. Microalbuminuria, if not taken care of, can lead to macroalbuminuria. And the more protein you have in your urine, the more likely your kidneys are to get worse. So it's real important to manage that correctly, appropriately, and get on the right medications, right? Second thing is the creatinine and the EGFR, okay? So if you have an EGFR less than 60, speak to your primary care doctor about what they think is going on, whether or not they feel comfortable with that value or not. Not every single patient who has an EGFR less than 60 needs to see a kidney doctor. Now, I will say most of them should at the very least have that discussion with their primary care doctor about whether or not that should be the case. Second thing is you could always ask for a consult. There are some insurances that do not require a primary care doctor referral to see a specialist. The other thing is that you could always speak with your doctor, say, hey, I would like to see a kidney doctor. Like if you speak to your doctor and say, hey, I would like to do this, it's not like they're going to say no, like they're just going to say, okay, fine. One less thing off my plate that I need to look at, So I think that you need to advocate for yourself. The second thing is ask questions. A lot of times patients don't ask questions because they don't want to waste the doctor's time or they don't want to sound stupid, One thing I always tell my patients when they ask a question, say, hey, I got a question. I think it might be a stupid question, but I want to ask it anyway. I say, the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask, the one that you walk into the parking lot like, man, I should have asked that question, Like, because ultimately it's your health. If you're not going to advocate for yourself, who is? Doctors are going to do the best that we can to take care of you, but we're not God. We could only work on the information that we have in front of us and the information that you give us. If you don't tell us something, if you take some random medications over the counter and just don't tell us about it, that's also, something else. We need to know what medication you're taking, what you're doing, and everything else. I mean, that's my 2-minute summary.
So it's their target blood pressure and A1C.
Oh, okay. Target blood pressure should be less than 130 over 80. If you're less than 60 and have chronic kidney disease, if you're above 60, probably 140 over 90. If you don't have protein in the urine or chronic kidney disease, less than 140 over 90, unless you have heart disease, where it should be less than 130 over 80.
And do include what foods we should be adding to our diet.
I'm sorry?
What foods should we be adding to our
Should we
diet?
be adding
Or
water?
subtracting.
Water is the one that you need to add to your diet. And then I guess just try to minimize the salt. I'm not, the best person to talk about in terms of diet. I'll be honest, because usually what we do is we don't tell people what to eat. We tell people what not to eat, which is kind of a separate conversation. Because if someone has a high potassium or problems with phosphorus, where we didn't really talk about that, but that's, something else that you need to look at. You speak to patients that have really advanced levels of chronic kidney disease where potassium and phosphorus are issues, to tell them, hey, low potassium, low phosphorus diet.
No
Right?
avocados.
No avocados. Well, not
Oh,
no avocados.
no.
Like, if you look
That's
at
bananas too.
avocados in terms of potassium content, they're not high, they're like moderate. But if
Okay.
you eat 20 of them, it's gonna add up.
Well, I could eat a whole lot of avocados. I don't know about
Avocados are
Sonya, but
delicious.
I
You know?
love
I
avocados.
don't either, but I know bananas are often what
Yeah.
my mom loves and stuff. So
So like bananas, if you have like for every 1 inch of a banana, you have like 1 milliequivalent of potassium. So that's why like they say, well, if you have a low potassium, eat like one banana. So if you have a 10-inch banana, it's like 10 milliequivalents of potassium a day or something like that. So, ultimately, would you rather give someone a 10 or 20 milliequivalent potassium pill to keep the potassium up, or say, hey, eat 2 bananas? Now, if they're diabetic, eating 2 bananas is a lot of sugar. So you might not tell them that. But if it's a non-diabetic patient, you'll say, hey, 20 milliequivalents of potassium, two bananas, that's okay,
And where should our diabetic patients keep their A1Cs?
less than 7.
Less than 7.
Yeah.
And A1C is what is that? And
It's
just for those.
hemoglobin A1C. So they check the blood, and whenever you check the blood in the lab, it has a little kind of, it's called a glycosylation. So it's a chemical thing. And the thing is that when you look at how much blood is glycosylated, the more blood sugar, the higher your blood sugar is, the higher your glycosylated hemoglobin. So more blood is attached to a blood sugar ring. And that's where you get that hemoglobin A1C value.
Well, good. Well, we thank you so much for joining us here and sharing your expertise and indulging some of Sonia's questions. We really appreciate that. I'm glad she didn't drag you down that political rabbit hole that she wanted to.
Hey, I try to stay away from it, because,
hey, good luck, because it's harder. It's harder every year, I'd imagine.
but we appreciate your expertise. And if someone wanted to enlist your service or wanted to come see you in Nashville, or you're in Columbia and Nashville?
I'm in Columbia, but my group is called Nephrology Associates. We're pretty much all throughout Tennessee, and we also have a section of our group in Kentucky. So they're in Madisonville and Hopkinsville and Clarksville. But I'm in Columbia and Pulaski, but we have a lot of people in Nashville, all through the mid-state, north and south. And we communicate with each other. So even if you live in one place and you go to one hospital, unless it's Vanderbilt, we typically have a doctor that can look at our notes and communicate with one another. And they're like, hey, you went to the hospital because X, Y, and Z. I'll get you in with Dr. Cardona within a week or two. So they could see us in Columbia, Tennessee, Nephrology Associates.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm going to tell my doctor, Dr. Cardona said this. So.
Oh, no.
And she's probably going to get it wrong.
Views and opinions are specifically
for entertainment purposes only. Thanks again for joining us on the Roundtable Consult. We wish you the best as well.
All right. Thank you. You take care.
All right.
Well, Dr. Williams, seems like you got some decent friends. We want to see some more of them in the next coming week.
We have to decide what we're going to do for that 25th. And we'll hopefully, as we close out Black History Month, and so we'll see what happens. Maybe we have a special closeout show for you. Surprise. Tune in. You wouldn't want to miss it.
You wouldn't want to. And of course, if you have options or topics that you would like us to discuss, feel free to include those in the comments as well. So thanks so much, you guys, for tuning in. Always make sure you not only like the Facebook page, but go check us out on your favorite podcast platform. Check us out on YouTube, get some more views there, and also check a repeat of this episode on Star Radio. Until next Saturday, thank you guys so much for tuning in.